So welcome everybody. We're going to talk about background tasks today, and my goal here is to talk about background tasks without having to involve a separate service. This is a Stack Overflow question. This is kind of an old one. It's over 10 years old at this point, but I think it's relevant. It's about threading. It's not necessarily about background processing, but we just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of this answer, this sarcastic, pretty worthless, but accepted answer to the question is that multi-threading does many things, but simplification isn't really one of them. And I think the same is true for background processing. By the way, I can criticize this answer because I'm the one who left this sarcastic answer back in 2009. So today's agenda is we're going to talk about background tasks. What are some ways that background tasks have been handled in the past? And then I'm going to show you Hangfire, which I think has a kind of different approach to background processing that has its own useful niche. And we're going to show a demo of that as well. I have an ASP.NET project running, and I'm going to show you some of the favorite things about Hangfire. And then we'll wrap up with some gotchas and some tips if you plan to use Hangfire yourself, and some other resources you can check out. We are at JetBrains, so this is being recorded, but I thought I'd put the link up here anyway and just give me a chance to say thank you to Martin and the rest of JetBrains for having me on for this webinar. I really appreciate it. My name is Matthew Groves. I work for Couchbase as a developer advocate, and there's some other ways you can find me, and that's a picture that kind of looks like me. I don't usually dress that nicely. All right, let's get on with it here, background processing. So let's go way, way back to the early computing days, and we'll talk about Cron. So Cron is time-based scheduling. Cron is a Unix command. In Windows, the equivalent is a scheduled task, and cloud providers have similar capabilities. There's like Azure Scheduler, AWS scheduled tasks, and so on. And Cron itself has this specific syntax. And I want to point this out because we're going to see this later today. But often when people say cron job, they really mean execute some process on a schedule, whether it's cron or not. Now, cron is a great tool for doing this kind of background processing, scheduled jobs, and it's stood the test of time. It's possibly one of the best pieces of software ever created, just based on how long it's been around. So I'm not going to tell you you should not use cron or a scheduler. But the issue with cron is that typically it's going to require a separate process to be created and deployed, and also, a separate process to run cron or to start cron, and that can complicate your deployment, and that may be more than what you need for your project. And you could just have cron hit an HTTP endpoint in your ASP.NET application, but that's going to now tie up HTTP, and even a really dirt simple script like cron curl is going to be a separate thing that has to be remembered and deployed and updated separately from your ASP.NET app. And the other thing with cron, it's just a scheduler. It doesn't really have any state. It can't do things like fire and forget or continuations, retries by itself. So it's a really, really simple, powerful tool, but it doesn't give you a lot of the power that some of these other tools give you. And these are the other approach to background processing is use a message broker or a queuing system, a service bus, the actor model, PubSub, something like this. And these are all tools that are meant to pass messages around between processes and or distribute work amongst multiple nodes or worker processes. And once again, these are all fine pieces of software, been around for a while. They're being used to great effect. They all have state, unlike cron, so they can do things like retries. Well, I think they all have state. I haven't used all of these. I've used most of them. So you can do things like retries, and you can support different models of scaling. There's lots of monitoring tools and ecosystems around these. And again, these are all fine tools. I'm not going to tell you shouldn't use them either. But in my experience, these are relatively heavy solutions. Rabbit and Kafka require deployments of their own, and the others might as well. Some of them I have not used. Quartz I've used before without a separate deployment, but a separate process anyway. And they may require implemented specific interfaces like base classes and APIs, and that may require some coupling, which, your mileage may vary on how much you want to do that. And again, these are for good reason, because they support complex scenarios, multiple state background processing, long-running multi-step processes, broadcasting, things like that. So these are powerful tools, but they're very heavy and or require some complexity to get up and running with them. So these are the kind of the drawbacks and trade-offs of those two approaches, the cron approach and the separate piece of software approach, is that in both cases, you have separate deployments. So a separate thing apart from your ASP.NET application to get those background processes running. With Cron, it's very, very simple, straightforward, and very limited. And with the non-Cron stuff, it can be very complex and heavy to set up and deploy. And some of them may require you to modify your code and do some tight coupling. So those are some of the drawbacks and trade-offs involved in using those approaches. And so I think, I came across another tool that I think fits nicely in between these. It's a nice in-between approach, and that it's an easy way to get up and running, easy as Cron, but doesn't require a separate process and still has state. So this tool is called Hangfire. This is a screenshot from the Hangfire website. This is the elevator pitch for Hangfire, and I think it addresses those drawbacks. It carves out its own niche. So it's easy to get started for really simple tasks. And if you do want to scale to multiple processes down the road, you can do that as well. It's easy to scale out. So this is kind of the architectural overview of how Hangfire works. So you have a Hangfire client. It's going to create a job, and that's going to be stored somewhere in some sort of persistence. And then the Hangfire server will then go look at that persistence and fetch the job and then perform it in the background. Now, one thing I want to tell you about this is that the client and the server can be the same machine, or they can be different machines. Now, in my example, to keep things simple, to keep the deployment really simple, they're going to be the same machine. And now to scale those out, the way it scales, if you need scaling, you may not need this in the long run, but if you do, the way it scales is going to look familiar to many of you. It's simple to how you would scale, say, a session provider with ASP.NET. As you scale out your ASP.NET application, so you have multiple servers there behind a load balancer is a typical scenario. Hangfire is going to scale with it because the way I'm writing it, each of those servers is also a Hangfire client and vice versa. And now if you want to, you can also scale, you can also deploy servers independently. So Hangfire is not coupled to ASP.NET, so it can run in a console app or a Windows service or whatever as well. And now for that actual storage there, that Hangfire data, if you install Hangfire by default, it comes with a SQL Server provider, but there are lots of extensions to use many other databases for job storage. And I happen to be using Couchbase, of course. And I think Couchbase is a great fit when you go to scale as well, because it can scale just as easily as ASP.NET and Hangfire can. And so you can get faster access as well to job data and get horizontal scaling with that. And by the way, Couchbase can also handle your session storage, your caching, and maybe even small parts of your application like user profile and things like that. As far as monitoring goes, this is one of my favorite things about Hangfire, and this really sealed the deal for me personally, is that Hangfire ships with a built-in UI, a complete functional dashboard to show job history, a graph of history, a list of recurring jobs. You can view a list of all the jobs that have been executed in the past. You can actually kick off jobs manually. If you want to just execute them manually, it's a couple clicks on the dashboard, and I'll show you that here in a demo. And you get a list of servers. So whenever a Hangfire server starts up and connects to persistence, you can see that in the dashboard here, all the servers. We'll just see one today, but in the scaling scenario, you can see a whole list of those servers that just show there automatically. So those are the things I like about Hangfire. I want to get into a little bit about how it works here, and then we'll go into a demo. So there's different tasks that you can execute in Hangfire, and the first type is called fire and forget. And these are executed only once and almost immediately after you create them. So for instance, if you want to fire off a background task to send an email or execute some process against a slow API or anything that you don't want or need to block your application for, you can just fire and forget in a background task. And so this is the syntax to do that. I want to point out a few things here. So you use backgroundjob.enqueue. And that's background job is a Hangfire class there. So you're going to enqueue something and you give it a C# expression. You don't need to implement an iJob interface or a base class or anything like that. You can just put in whatever C# you want here and it will execute that in the background. Now, don't take this as a challenge, right? But Hangfire has not choked on anything I've thrown its way so far. And in fact, I recommend you don't try to challenge it, and we'll see why later. But it's pretty good at taking these expressions, and it's not failed me yet. The other thing I want to point out is that it returns a job ID, and this is important to note, the job ID it returns, because another type of task is called a continuation. And a continuation is executed after a given job has been finished. So I like to think about Amazon purchases in terms of long-running processes that would require background jobs. So the first job might be to verify inventory. So we fire off a task that executes against an API. Who knows how long the API will take? Maybe it requires some manual intervention. Who knows? But once that job returns, the next step would be to, okay, let's do payment processing. So we can't really do them at the same time. We have to wait until we verify inventory before we can do payment processing. The next job will be shipping, then email notification, etc. And so it makes sense to execute these all in the background. We don't want to make the user wait for these because they could take hours, it could take days in some situations. So continuations is the way we can handle that. The next type, this is the one I use the most, is recurring. And so recurring jobs are kind of like cron. They'll execute on a schedule. And in fact, they use exactly the same syntax as cron. So we're sort of using the same knowledge that we've built up all the years from using cron, and we're applying that to a new system here. And so you want to run some code every night. You want to update a cache record every minute or so. You want to process some Azure Cognitive Services, maybe every couple of hours. And so again, the syntax here is just recurring job, but .add or update. And this I would usually run on startup, but you don't have to. And you're going to again supply a C# expression and then a cron expression, literally the same syntax. Now there are some helpers there, like in this case, cron.daily, but you can also just specify a string, and it's just literally a cron string with the same kind of syntax you'd expect. Okay, there are some other task types in Hangfire. So there are delayed jobs. So for instance, if I want to send an email reminder in 7 days from now, I could set up a delayed job. And there are batches and batch continuations. So a batch is a group of background tasks that are created atomically that are considered a single entity. And then batch continuations are just like continuations, but after a batch. Now those things are only available in the pro version of Hangfire. So I'm not used those yet. I'm still using just a regular open source free version of Hangfire in my own work. But those are some other options you have there with Hangfire if you need those. Okay, so now let's go over to a demo here, and we're going to actually look at some code. So let me switch over here, and what I want to do is I want to switch my screen over to here. Okay, so I've got Project Writer. Sorry, I keep calling it that, but JetBrains Writer open up here, and I've got a ASP.NET application, and the source code for this is all available if you want to go through it. I think I have a link to it in the rest of the slides. But what I want to focus on here is startup.cs. This is an ASP.NET Core project, so it has a startup, like any ASP.NET Core project. So inside here, configure services. I've got some stuff here to set up Couchbase and set up some other services, et cetera, et cetera. What I've got here, this is the actual Hangfire setup. So I've added Hangfire with NuGet to the project. And basically ignore these lines right here. But this line here, I'm saying services.add Hangfire. That's really all you need to do. Services.add Hangfire, and then pass it some credentials to connect to the database of your choice. Now I'm using Couchbase in this case. So all these settings here is just pulling the configuration from app settings, setting up a Couchbase cluster connection here, and authenticating to it, and then using this Couchbase storage extension here to tell Hangfire, hey, use Couchbase. So I've actually got an extension for Couchbase called, appropriately enough, Hangfire.couchbase, and there's lots of extensions like that. So if I want to use Postgres or I want to use, whatever else database, MySQL or whatever, I'm sure there's a provider for it. And again, the way you do it is just say services.add Hangfire and then specify the connection here. That's it. That's really it for setting up Hangfire as a client. Now, if we want to set it up as a server as well, let's go down here to configure. And right here, I got one line, app.use Hangfire server. So that's me telling ASP.NET to use ASP.NET here to process background tasks from Hangfire. So with ASP.NET, now this application, I can put jobs into the background and I can process jobs out of the background. So I'm using the ASP.NET extension here, but of course, you could have a plain .NET Core console application doing one or the other, either creating, or consuming, or both. And the other thing I want to talk about here is, because this is ASP.NET, I can use the Hangfire dashboard. So this is all the code I need here for Hangfire dashboard. And that's going to give me a complete UI for viewing and managing my background tasks out of the box, right there in ASP.NET. So that's it. We're talking 5 or 6 lines of code to set up Hangfire. And then right here, I can start firing off some background jobs. Now, like I said, I'm using recurring jobs mainly in my application, exclusively in this one. So I'm running them all in startup.cs. I don't have to run them here. I could run them someplace else, but it's just convenient for me to do this. So I'm saying I want to add or update these jobs. Now, I'll take a second here to kind of describe what my application is actually doing, so you can understand why I'm using these background jobs. So I don't know if you're like me, but I have a huge collection of photos of my family, 20,000, 25,000 pictures from our phones and from our digital cameras that I back up to OneDrive because I don't want to lose these photos. I back them up to someplace in the cloud. The problem is my wife will come to me and she'll say, oh, you know what, actually, I think I have slides for this. Let me bring up the slides here. To show you, yes, okay, so the idea here is I have family photos, and I want some metadata around these photos. I'm showing you the wrong screen. Okay, we're going to switch over here real quick and then back to the slides. There we go. Okay, so I have 20,000 plus family pictures, and that's growing like every day pretty much. And they are stored in a mishmash of folders and files. So every once in a while, I'll take my wife's phone and I'll say, hey, I want to back up the photos on that phone. I'll put them in some folder in OneDrive. And that's fine. So all the photos are safe and they're backed up. But then this question comes along. Hey, would you find that one picture of Emma? You know, the one where she's in that Christmas dress for that one time we were at that Christmas party? And okay, I'm supposed to sort through 20,000 pictures to find that. So that's a tough problem for me to solve. So I wanted to create a program that would help me categorize and sort my pictures better. So for each picture, I want to know who's in the picture, one of my family members, so me, my wife, one of my 2 children, and then how good of a picture is it? So it may be a good picture of, it may have both of us in it, me and my son, but it may be a lousy picture of me and a good picture of him. So I want to categorize those as well. And other problems I have, so I have duplicate files sometimes, and I get blurry photos that were taken by mistake that I just backed up because I copied everything over. And those other photos we don't need to keep, you know, screenshots, or, you know, I took a picture of my food somewhere. We don't need to keep those photos. Let's erase those out there. So that's what I have set up. I have a ASP.NET application. This is really just for my own use. I haven't taken it public yet. I may do that at some point if it becomes useful enough. But I have recurring jobs set up there. So I have a job that's going to monitor my file system to find any new pictures that have hit the file system. And if it finds new pictures, create some data, create a document for that picture so we can start working on it. And then I have a cached progress update. So on a regular basis, I want to query my photos and see how much progress I'm making in terms of categorizing them and organizing them. So I want to get an idea of some progress that I'm making, because it's still a mostly manual process to do this. And to try to reduce the amount of manual processing, I've experimented with using Azure Cognitive Services to get photo information and to get face information, so I can start to make some guesses about who's in the picture and better organize them. And then I'm going to show you the Hangfire dashboard as well. Okay, so let's go back to the screen here. Go back over here to monitor 2. All right. So here is the actual application I've got running. So the idea here is that it's going to pick 2 pictures at random for me and say which of these is a better picture of, it's going to pick a random family member. So my son, Matthew. So which of these is a better picture of Matthew? And I got to decide, well, the lighting's a little off in this one, so I like this one better. So just by doing that, I'm telling the system that Matthew is in this photo, and I'm giving it a ranking algorithm to say that one's a better picture of Matthew in the photo. And I can keep doing this. So which is a better picture of Matt. That's me. And so none of them have me in them, so I'll say none. And so on. So when I get free time, or when my wife gets free time, we can sort through old pictures and try to categorize them. And then I can generate reports on what the better picture is, or which pictures, what's the top 50 pictures of Emma, etc. And then down here, you can see I've got this little ugly looking table, which might be hard for you to read, but this kind of gives me an idea of the progress that I'm making. So how many photos have categorization for all 4 family members? Only 2 of them. And then there's 4 photos that have no categorization at all. And so you can kind of get an idea of progress here as I go. And for this demo, I only have a small sampling of pictures. When I get to the 20,000 picture level, some of these stats become a little more interesting as we go along. But anyway, let's go now to the Hangfire dashboard. Actually, let me switch back here to code, because I wanted to go through how I set up these jobs. So the first one is photo processor, and this is going to look for new files on the file system every hour. And I've called this photo processor. I've given it a name. I'm just saying add or update. I can specify a type here, which is going to help me, because over here on the right side, I can just use that type. And so it's going to do some dependency injection for me and say, all right, run the process all method every hour. And it's saying cron hourly here. So all I'm doing is providing a C# expression. There is no interface implementation or base class or anything like that. This could be any C# code I want to run. Down here, I've got this this other cached score document method or background task, which is going to, again, just run a method every minute to update the scoring, the little ugly table at the bottom of the screen, to tell me how much progress I'm making. Now, I could run this job every time I refresh the page, but that's going to add time, perceptible time as a user, and it's going to slow down as I get in the flow of categorizing photos. It's going to slow me down. So if I run it in the background, I can still get an update every minute or so on how I'm doing, but it's not going to slow down my process of processing images in the foreground. And then I have 2 jobs here to interact with Azure. And so I run these to process each photo against the Azure Photo Cognitive Services and against Azure's Face Cognitive Services, and I run those daily. And I run about a batch of about 30 to 50 photos through this every day for 2 reasons. 1, it's a relatively slow process to do, so perfect for a background task. 2, since I'm using the free version, I'm rate limited on this. So I don't want to just throw every single photo that comes into Azure Cognitive Services. I just want to do a little bit every day. And so when I get results back from this, I can store those results, and then if we have time, I'll show you later what I actually do with the Cognitive Services results. And by the way, it's sometimes conflicting data coming back from these services. So this isn't completely automated. It still requires some manual intervention. So for instance, sometimes I get back a photo that says a picture of a boy standing on grass. And the face data will say, I found a female 9 years old. Right, so sometimes it conflicts. So there's still some process of doing this manually. If you ever used Azure Cognitive Services before, I'm sure you're familiar with that. Okay, let's go back over here to the application. And I've got a link here in my nav to the Hangfire dashboard. So take us over there. And I didn't build any of this. This is just all comes out of the box for free when I say app.hangfire dashboard. And you can see here's a history of all the jobs that have run. So you can see I kind of fired it up yesterday to test it out, and this has been running today. We've got 50 or so jobs that have been running since I started up the application today. And as jobs come in, you'll see, well, not one right now, but you'll see one show up on the real-time graph as well. So if we go here, look at recurring jobs, you can see those 4 jobs that I created are listed here in the dashboard. And it tells me when they're going to be executed next, when they were last executed, when they were first created, etc. And this is, only 4 jobs, but you can see we have capability of listing lots and lots of jobs here. And if I want to trigger them immediately, I can just check one of these boxes or 2 of these boxes and trigger them now. So the Azure isn't going to trigger for another 9 hours. Let's go ahead and trigger it now. Maybe I want to test it out. Maybe I want to just, maybe it failed last night. I want to run it again today. So I'll run those jobs. And it looks like they already finished running. So you can see here, this is a history of all the succeeded jobs that have been run. So you can see those 2 Azure jobs were just run a few seconds ago, and my cache document job runs every minute here. You see a big history of that. All right, and you know, you can see retries and errors and things like that. So if I drill into one of these, if there was an error, I could drill into some more details to see what the exception was, which machine it ran on, how long it took, all this kind of stuff. And this is all comes for free with Hangfire. Here's a list of servers. So I just have the one right now, just my laptop. But if I were to add additional processes as Hangfire servers, as long as they connect to the same database, the same persistence, they will appear in this list here. So I can know exactly how many servers I have running. I'll go back to the dashboard here to see if nothing's shown up yet. So this real-time graph only shows as they happen, right? And so I just missed one. But anyway, it would just be one column here, slowly moving to the left as those jobs come in. Not terribly interesting for this system because I'm only running, you know, a handful of jobs. Okay, so that's really it as far as the demo goes. Like I said, I'll make this code available. I do want to talk about this authorization a little bit, but I'll do that when I get back to the slides. But before I go over back to the slides here, I want to take a second, see if there's any questions that have come in that I can answer here in the code or in the web browser.
Yeah, there's maybe a couple that could be interesting. Okay, one is, can recurring tasks be set not to run if a previous instance is still running?
Can you say that one more time?
So when you run a task, can a recurring task be set so it doesn't run if a previous instance is still going?
Okay, so if a previous instance is still going of a recurring task. So kind of what you're saying is I have a task, it's taking longer than I'd expect. I don't want to kick off another version of that task. That's a good question. I think the answer is yes. There are lots of things you can do to give some metadata about your about the tasks you want to run, and you can configure those. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I've not.
I actually just got a question in that is also an answer from Khalid, and he says that yes, you can put an attribute on the job. You can say that it only has to run this job one at a time.
Yeah, I think I was going to say I wasn't 100% sure with that, but definitely there's a system of attributes you can put on these jobs to configure them, and I think that was one of the configurations. But I wasn't 100% sure, so thank you for that answer. Appreciate that.
All right, so yeah, that answers it. Maybe another one while we're still in the setup of
Sure.
all the jobs there. That is, will reoccurring Hangfire jobs still fire if the IIS setting of the hosted application times the application out, or if
really
the application
good question.
Closes?
Really good question. I'm going to get to that in the slides here as one of the gotchas/tips.
All right, perfect. Then I guess that's a perfect transition back to slides.
Okay, very good. So I will bring those back up here. You just switch screens. Maybe. Where is my? Here we go. I want to show this screen over here. And let's bring up the slides here. So we're actually making really good time here. So if there's anything else you want to see, just let me know, and I'm happy to go into it in more detail. But some of the gotchas and tips with Hangfire. So exceptions, you know, as much as you love them not to happen in a background task, they do happen sometimes. And then Hangfire is going to, by default, log these exceptions for you. So here's a screenshot here of an exception that happened to me some time ago. And I blurred out some of the sensitive details there, but this is an actual exception that took place in the system. And it's going to log these exceptions, A, and then B, it's also going to retry your task up to 10 times, again, by default, and it's going to add an increasing delay between each of those attempts. Now, all these things are configurable, so you can say, I don't want to retry it, or I only want to retry it 5 times, or I don't want to increase the delay, or I want to have a larger delay, things like that. And now, once you see the exception here in the dashboard, you can view the exception information, which can help you try to diagnose it. It's not going to be the full exception, especially if there's like a inner exception and so on. It's not going to serialize the full thing. But you can also re-queue the job, so you can restart it manually if you want to. And like I said, if you don't want to retry, you can specify that with a C# attribute for that task, or you can specify it globally. You can say across the board, don't retry if there's an exception. All right, so this is the question that was in the, someone asked here, basically about deployment. So ASP.NET applications, depending on how you deploy them, they may not start the first time until the first user hits your site. So in that case, Hangfire may not start right away, right? So if we're talking traditional ASP.NET, if the ASP.NET Core, if you run them in startup, the recurring jobs should start right away. But I think in both cases, the processes may be recycled after a period of inactivity. That's just how ASP.NET or IIS specifically works, and maybe other deployments of it. So for an on-premises site, you're going to need to do some additional configuration to keep the processes running. And Hangfire has a section of documentation all about this, how to do this. If you're deploying to Azure, one of the workarounds for this is there's an always-on setting. And that is not available on free sites on Azure. So just keep that in mind as well. You'll need to be one of the more premium Azure websites if you want to have this option here. And you can always fall back to a separate process. So keep that in mind. I mean, that's my thesis was, let's keep it simple and keep it in one process. But if you're getting to the point where it's more complicated, we want to have some guarantees, a separate process may be in order. And you can always set up a cron job to ping your site. So again, we're back to cron being a useful tool. So, this is still an easy way to start out, but in the long run, you still might want to have separate processes to handle this. Another gotcha is dashboard security. So by default, that dashboard I showed you is only available to localhost. And that's a pretty sensible default for security reasons. So if you want anyone who's not on localhost to have access to that dashboard, you have to create something called an authorization filter. And this just has one method called authorize, and you can implement it here. And this example here is just saying anyone who's authenticated can view the dashboard, right? And that may be a little bit too permissive, so you may want to limit it to certain people with a specific role or from a specific IP address or whatever you want to do. Now, in my code example, I literally just said return true always, so anyone can see the dashboard, which is not obviously recommended for production, but you can put your authorization logic in here and then pass that as an authorization filter to the use Hangfire dashboard method there. Okay. One other tip / gotcha is that when we're creating those tasks, we're passing in a C# expression, and that expression gets serialized and saved to the persistence every time you create the process. So arguments then are converted into JSON. And therefore, if we're passing in a very large entity or a very complex entity, that's going to be a lot of overhead and a lot of storage that you don't necessarily need. So I would say if you have complex entities that you're passing into your background, now not all of my examples you saw had no arguments at all. But if you need to pass in arguments, I would recommend passing in as small as argument as you can. So instead of passing in the whole entity, pass in just the entity ID, for instance, and then you can query back out the entity if you need to inside the background task. All right. I'm not saying you should never do this, but it's just a good idea to keep those arguments as small as possible because they all get saved to JSON. Okay. All right, one more. So again, back to drawbacks and trade-offs. So early on in the session, I told you about Cron. I told you about all those other methods you can use to do background processing. Hangfire itself is, again, not a silver bullet. It does have some trade-offs of its own. So we've talked about some of them as far as deployment goes, right? If they're living in ASP.NET, there is maybe some hoops you have to jump through to make sure your ASP.NET is going to be available to do that process, especially for the recurring jobs, right? With Hangfire, the drawbacks here that I can see of is .NET or .NET Core only. So if you're trying to look for an enterprise-wide solution and you're not exclusively on .NET, this may not be the right tool for that, right? Because it's not going to work with Java, at least not that I know of. It's not going to work with Node, etc. It does require persistence, right? So there's lots of plugins for this and other persistence tools. So SQL Server out of the box, I'm showing off Couchbase, lots of other databases. With background processing, you don't always need persistence, right? So if this is going to add some additional overhead in terms of you have to connected to a database. And if your background processing doesn't need that, well, then this is maybe too heavy of a tool for that. And then I talked about the default deployment inside of ASP.NET application. When it comes to keeping it alive, there are some trade-offs there. And you know, I won't necessarily say a drawback or trade-off, but there are some premium features that do cost extra. For some reason, the developer wants to get paid for his work. I don't know, he's crazy like that. But if you want to use Redis or you want to use batching, I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a premium, a cost to that. But it is very reasonably priced. I'm not here to sell you Hangfire, but the pricing for the licensing is very reasonable. Okay, and they say, as we wrap up here, I'm definitely open to more questions, but you only remember 3 things from any given presentation. This is what I've heard. So here they are. Number 1 is that Hangfire makes it easy to get up and running with background tasks. No separate deployment, no base class, just add a NuGet package, connect to a database, and away you go. Hangfire can scale very big, just like Couchbase can scale very big. And it's very easy to do that. You can scale horizontally. You can add a standalone Hangfire service if you want to. You can keep them in ASP.NET. You have lots of flexibility there about scaling. Hangfire comes with a UI right out of the box. You know, as developers, we're supposed to love the command line and memorize all those arcane commands, and we look really cool when we're doing that. But personally, I like a very powerful UI that I can interact with and look at graphs. And these are graphs that you can show to someone, you know, a project manager, and say, oh, we had this problem back then, but we fixed it, and here's the graph to prove it. So I think this is a very powerful, useful tool, and it comes with Hangfire right out of the box. So that really kind of sealed the deal for me. Some other resources you can check out. You know, Cron is everywhere, but here's a tutorial about the Cron syntax. So if you're interested in exploring that some more, check that out. If Hangfire seems like it's not, you know, you're still going to need to have a separate process anyway, you might want to check out these open source projects, Mass Transit and Top Shelf. I'm plugging these because a couple of friends of mine work on these projects. But those are some way, I think Top Shelf is a way to manage background processes and deployment in a much easier fashion. And Mass Transit's a way to do, I mentioned it early on, it's a way to do background processing as well. And then I want to point to a relatively old blog post by Hanselman back in 2014. It did a pretty good rundown on background processing. He even mentioned Hangfire back then, but there's other tools on there, so definitely check those out. And I believe these slides will be available for you after the session. For Hangfire itself, hangfire.io is the website, and there's a GitHub repo as well. It is really good documentation, and you know, as someone who works with documentation and reads documentation a lot, there's lots of good examples, lots of bad examples. I think Hangfire is an exceptional example of documentation, so definitely check that out there. There are a ton of Hangfire extensions, so if you look at it, Hangfire/extensions there, some of them are by the Hangfire guy himself, and some of them are by community projects. So lots of, it's not just for persistency, there's lots of other plugins you can use for Hangfire. So if you have a question about can Hangfire do this, can Hangfire do this, the answer might be yes, there's an extension for it. The Hangfire Couchbase project, which I am a very, very tiny contributor to, it's right there on GitHub as well, hangfire.couchbase. So if you want to try out Hangfire, you want to try out Couchbase, you can certainly do that there. And then Hangfire Pro, which I mentioned, comes with features and pricing, support, and things like that. Very reasonable price. Here are a few of the companies that use Hangfire that are on the website there. You can also use me as a resource as well. If anything looks interesting to you or you have any feedback, usually when I do this in person, I say come talk to me in the hallway after the session. We don't have a hallway here, but you can contact me on Twitter. You can email me. I do live streams. I've done several live streams on Hangfire on Twitch, so you can check that out, twitch.tv/MatthewDGroves. My boss says it's my job. I have to listen to you. So now's your chance. If you want to get something off your chest, you can definitely contact me, and I'll help you the best I can. That's all I have right now, Martin. So if there's more questions, or if you want to dive into some more code, I'm happy to do that. But that's all I have prepared right now.
Perfect. First of all, thank you very much. There are a couple of additional questions here. One is if it is possible to customize the dashboards to basically be visible in the application and maybe show just the jobs that some person queued into the system.
Oh, good question. I don't think so. I think it's pretty much just the dashboard is the way it is. Now, again, there might be an extension for it to customize dashboards, but I will also say all that data that makes up those dashboards is stored in whatever database you have hooked up Hangfire to. So you could hypothetically create queries to analyze that data yourself and plug them into whatever dashboard or reporting tool that you wish. But there may be an extension for it as well.
All right, cool, thanks. Another interesting question I find is the question if there's any gotchas around the serializations of the expressions that you define the job with. For example, if you accidentally rename a method, or you think it's internal, but it's actually serialized and stored somewhere in your database. Do you have any guidance on that, or best practices, or any gotchas that you know of?
Yeah, so I actually faced this a little bit myself. What I did was I made a change to one of the methods that I passed in, and it ended up as actually one of my small contributions to Hangfire itself was sort of handling these errors a little better. And so the idea there, if you remember the syntax, it's recurring job dot add or update, right? So if you make a change, that data is serialized, and it's potentially could break your job down the line. Right, but if you need to remove the job, you can do that from the dashboard, and then the next time that startup or whatever code that kicks it off runs, it will add or update that existing job with the new any new changes to the serialization, the serialized objects that get passed in. So the short answer is it's going to cause an error, most likely, right? But you can recover relatively easily by just updating that job. Like I said, we've made some changes to Hangfire to actually better handle that situation. And the error message before was pretty hard to understand and hard to diagnose and fix. So we've made some changes to make that easier for you to address and fix those errors as they come in.
All right, sounds good. I guess that's pretty much everything. There's one more maybe, whether you heard about the Coravel projects, and if you know it, what do you think about it? How does it?
Is that James asking that question?
That is not James asking the question.
Okay. I've certainly heard of Coravel. That's I think it has some background processing built in, but Coravel itself, as far as I know, it's a much larger framework. It's not just for background processing. It does lots of stuff, and background processing is one of them. I've not got a chance to use it yet, but I certainly have heard about it.
All right, cool. Yeah, again, I think that's all in terms of questions. Again, thank you for a very good presentation. Thank you for joining us, even though you have more conference talks coming up today. So thanks for that.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I'll quickly move over to my screen. There we are. And leave everyone with some resources. So there's just a few links that I want to share here. There's the ReSharper website, the Writer website that you can go to. Follow us on Twitter. If you're interested in the recording, check JetBrains TV on YouTube or check our blog in the coming days. And of course, like Matt asked, if you want to get in touch, you can find him on Twitter, or you can watch him code and do other stuff on Twitch. Now, before we leave, there's one additional thing that I want to mention. If you, as an attendee here, want to speak at the JetBrains.net Day online this year, we have a call for speakers open until March 15th, and we're looking for any topic that is broad enough in .NET space. So if you feel like speaking, please submit your sessions, and we can maybe have you on our JetBrains.net Day online webinars. Details on the website that you see on screen here. With that, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks again, Matt, for presenting today. And again, keep an eye on our YouTube channel or the blog for the recording of this webinar. Take care, everyone.